As you look at setting up your church, you always want to think about your financial systems and structures. Systems and structures may, tend to be overwhelming at times, but the more time you spend setting it all up in the beginning, the less stress you're going to have down the road. Think about your systems and structures for how you're going to move people through the discipleship process. If you're going to use a system and structure for that, I would encourage you to also have a system and structure for how you're going to move money through your church. Who's going to control your money? How is it going to sit there? How is it going to be in your church? A lot of thought tends to get, shall we say, sidetracked when it comes to thinking about, well, I got to raise a lot of money. I need to, get a lot of money in here. But what are you going to do with it while it's there? How are you going to manage it? How are you going to process it? Who's going to touch the money? How many different ways are you going to have for money to flow into your church? That's what I want to challenge you with today to think about as you look at starting a church. Think about the systems and the processes. Remember this, whatever gets managed can only be done so because it gets measured. If there's no measurement, there can be no management. What systems are you going to use to measure out your money? The Bible tells us very clearly that before we build a tower, we're to sit down, count the cost to see if we have sufficient to finish it. There will be more videos in these programs with how to create a budget and what a budget actually looks like. But before we get into the details of actually setting up budgets, let's get into the details of what it means to manage that budget. When you look at being legal when it comes to managing money, you want to make sure you have the proper bylaws, your proper articles of incorporation filed with your state, get that EIN number. You've got to get all that set up before you start collecting money. I've seen some churches, they go to get started and they start having money coming in and they don't even have their legal stuff set up yet. And that can be a major problem, especially with the IRS. So before you start asking for donations, you start asking, especially for large donations, make sure that you are properly registered with the Secretary of State, you have the proper bylaws. And I know there's a lot of things that can be out there to help you get that done, but make sure you have that in place so you can get your checking accounts open. We want to talk also about what kind of accounts you need. A lot of times people will think, well, I need an account for our ministry division, I need an account for operations, I need an account for other specific ministries. Historically, churches would have a checking account for the ladies ministry, they'd have a checking account for youth ministry. That's not recommended anymore. You want to have two accounts to get started. You want to have a checking account, a basic operations account that all money flows into as it comes into the church, whether it's electronically, it's a check, it's cash, whatever. You want one landing point from that. Following up with that, you want a savings account. You want an account that you can move money into to save for special projects. You can have it earmarked in that savings account for building fund. You can have it earmarked for a major, maybe community event you're going to do, or maybe to buy a sound system, something like that. But there's no need to open up 14 different accounts. And I say that only slightly sarcastically because I've seen churches that have a wide range of numbers of accounts. Don't do that to yourself. That gets way too hard to manage. Just narrow it down to just two accounts and then start managing it out from there. The next question is, how are you going to manage the money with software? There are so many options out there, and in some of the notes that we can provide, we can dig into more details on what all's out there. But I want you to think about how you're actually managing the money. Having online banking, of course, is essential, but you don't use online banking to actually manage the money. Use programs like QuickBooks, ChurchTrack, Breeze, some of those kind of programs. Start Church even has a good one that you can use to get started with, because you want to be able to create financial documents. So let's pause for a minute. Let's talk about those financial documents and why it's so important to have the proper systems in place so you can produce the proper documents. If you were to ask a donor for a large amount of money, and they ask you, well, show me how you're going to manage this money. Show me your systems and processes. You want to be able to create financial reports, a profit and loss sheet, a cash flow statement, a balance sheet. You want to be able to create those things to prove to people that you're managing the money correctly, because doing that builds trust. When you build trust with your church members, you build trust with donors, you can build trust with lenders. All of this is what's going to help give people the confidence they need to invest back into your church, especially with your membership. If it gets to the point where you need to buy a building, you need to borrow money, and you need that church to ratify it and to support that, You want to be able to show them that you have been managing the money, accurately and correctly, so that there's never any question about where's the money going, who's it supporting, all those kind of things. You've got to be able to create those financial documents, again, to show the church. You have annual business meetings, you have other reasons of why you would need to make sure that those documents are in place. Also, with your lender, you want to make sure you can create a profit and loss sheet. Some people call it an income expense statement, a cash flow statement. There's several words for it. You've got to be able to show your banker that you have been managing money correctly over the past 3, 4, 5 years, whatever it may be, to give them the confidence so that they can come back to you and loan you the money that you need. As you look at these items, and again, I want to make sure that we're not getting these too confused and causing too much stress for us, but just understanding that when you go to set up your accounting systems and you go to set up your money management systems, it's very important that you make it to where it produces the proper documents, because that, again, is what builds trust with people who are giving your church money. Let's dial in a little bit more on the church financial software programs. Again, there's a lot of programs out there, but I want you to think about, again, the kind of reports that have to be created. I've talked about profit and loss sheets, I've talked about balance sheets, but there's another kind of report that also has to be created every year, and that is a contribution statement. Whenever people give money to your church, they can have an IRS tax deduction for that. You have to be able to create a contribution statement that you'll sign every year that validates the amount of money that they've donated to their church. They then give that to their tax preparer and can use it for their tax benefits. There are software programs that can create those documents for you. There's programs like Realm, Breeze, I believe even the Start Church. I know that is also in churchtrack.com. They can create those documents for you. You really want to make sure that you have the accuracy built in, because if somebody ever gets audited and the IRS pulls that contribution statement, and they can come back to the church and say, can you validate that this is exactly what happened in 2022? You have to make sure you have those proper documents in place. Now, on top of that, again, creating the profit and loss statements. There are software programs that create those statements also. Programs like QuickBooks, Applos, again, ChurchTrack. Some of those programs are really good at creating those financial statements, again, that you would use at your annual business meeting, that you would give to your bankers, anytime you're turning in different kind of financial reports. When you look at these, there are a couple programs, one in particular, that can do both of those. They can create contribution statements and they can create your profit and loss statements. The one that we found that can do both really well is called ChurchTrack. Church and then track is spelled TRAC.com. It's pretty inexpensive. I'm not, we don't get paid by them to refer them. I want to clarify that. But we've had several churches that have used ChurchTrack to get loans when they apply for loans with the church loan fund, and it creates great reports while at the same time allowing them to create contribution statements for their membership. The reason I dig into this is because you really need to think about which program you're going to use to manage your church finances. If you choose QuickBooks and you have somebody in your church that's really good at accounting and they're trained on QuickBooks, QuickBooks is a great program, but QuickBooks does not create contribution statements. Applos, again, a great program for managing church finances, but it does not create church financial statements. Planning Center has a planning center, a financial element that can. There are programs that do, but it can get a little cumbersome. If you're not, accustomed to using two different programs, I would encourage you as a small church to look at, maybe is there a program out there that you can have everything all in one deal. And again, I know ChurchTrack can do that. And it also helps you with managing people. So there's software programs, again, that can help you manage attendance. It helps you manage your guest follow-up. You've probably done a lot of research on that already, but look for the ones that can also help with the financial element to it. We know Breeze can do some great stuff. Start Church has a few things. ChurchTrack, again, has all that element built into it. Realm is another great program that we see used quite a bit that can really help churches on how they manage all that out. A couple years ago, we did a very in-depth analysis on all the loans that we've done for the church loan program. We've done over 250 loans. We've also looked at over 800 churches. and we have all of that data. And so we research through all of that data to discover, what are United Pentecostal churches using to help manage their systems. And all the programs that I've named already are the most common ones that we see churches using, and they like them. Obviously, there's some programs that may be a little too cumbersome, but if you're a techie kind of person and you don't mind that, go for it. If you need something that's a little more low key, something that's easier to manage, then obviously look in that direction and find out what other churches are using. Again, just to kind of reiterate, we see Planning Center, Church Track, Aplos. We see a lot of that used. We also see Faith Teams and Breeze and Planning Center. We see a lot of those programs used. Every once in a while, I'll hear about one that's kind of off the beaten path, so to speak. But just use something that you can get support in while you're using that program. You want to be able to make sure that if you make some mistakes with inputting data, that there's somebody out there who can help you correct those mistakes, again, so you can create those accurate financial reports. As you're looking at fundraising, you're looking at ways to bring money into the church. Of course, after the church gets started, you're going to have membership, obviously, to draw income from. You're going to want to teach tithing. You're going to want to teach giving. And there are so many ways that you could do that. And I would just encourage you, don't be afraid to teach giving and teach people how that they can be a blessing, not just to their church, but also to the community that you're reaching out into. If you have food packing programs, make sure you're teaching people that their giving goes to help do food packing events or other backpack events for school children or things like that. Educating your people on what the money is doing is vital, again, to building trust so that they will continue to invest back into the church. So you have the internal donors. That's your membership. You're contributing there on a weekly basis, monthly basis. But then you also have outside donors. You may have churches that are maybe every month they send you, the traditional PIM type status thing. You may have individuals in your life and in your family that, they commit to giving money ever so often to you. I would definitely look at establishing both sides of that. Don't depend on just the local church for finances. But as you're doing a church startup, don't be afraid to ask people to help support the mission. And just remember this, people give to mission, not just you individually. So selling that mission and make sure they understand that the money is not going just to you. The money is going to support the mission of the entire church, and that you can support that, and that you're looking at ways that can help them contribute into that mission. The third way that money comes into the church is, of course, by loans, by allocations from headquarters, Christmas for Christ, things like that. And so these are ways that you're going to want to make sure that you have plenty of opportunities, open doors, if you will, for money to come into the church. Thinking about online giving. Now, I know in this generation now, online giving doesn't seem to be an issue. Everybody does it. We're all familiar with it, especially the younger generation. That's the only way that you know how to give. Think about it when people come into your church. There are studies that are being done now that say that, less than 60% of people ever even carry cash. So if you're going to have people walking in your church door, chances are they're not going to have cash. They're not going to have a checkbook. They're going to have money. It's in Apple Pay. It's in Cash App. It's in some other way other than the old traditional banking system. So how you are setting up ways for that money to come into the church is vital. Tithely, Givelify. There's several more that are out there. I know Realm has options. Faith Teams has options. Breeze has options. Don't just think about one or two ways. Studies have shown that churches that have 6 to 8 methods for giving are the ones that recognize the most in effective contributions. Yes, you still want to be able to take cash. You still want to be able to take checks and make deposits that way. There are people who are setting up through their own bank automatic transfers into churches. It's not even you doing it. It's them setting it up on their end. Make sure you educate your people that they can do that. We still see people that give through PayPal. For a while, PayPal was the only way to do it. Now there's obviously other ways, but some people still give through PayPal. We know there's people who do automatic contributions from their work because it's considered a charitable contribution. They can actually have that allocated through their payroll system. I know payroll systems like ADP and some of those electronic ones, they allow that and they can have that set up automatically. The more you set up automatically like that, of course, the more stability you have in the income of the church. Also looking at ways to teach people how to give on a family basis, educating the children on giving to projects. Again, we're not talking necessarily about making sure that we're supporting payroll of a church. We're talking about projects and educating children. There's a lot of things done. If you have a local library that you're doing some kind of a special book project through, you can funnel that money through your local church there, and your own children can give into those projects to help support that cause. Again, it goes back to making sure people understand that there's multiple ways for money to come into the church, and not just the traditional, here's a one-time offering, here's a check, but it's something that can be set up periodically. Another way to teach people how to give is through what we call legacy giving, through bequest. As people set up their personal finances, don't be afraid to teach them how to leave legacies in the local church. We see people that are now leaving 10% of a life insurance plan to the local church. We see people that through their estates, they're giving money back into the church. We could tell you story after story of how churches that, they've just been struggling along, but they had that one member that didn't even tell the pastor, but upon that person's death, they were notified by the attorney that, hey, there's been a $2 million gift left to your church. That's pretty crazy how things like that work, but they do happen. And so I want to encourage you, as you're thinking about teaching people how to give, make sure you're also teaching them how to give through what we call the legacy giving. It's giving beyond your own life. And you're setting up, whether it's an endowment fund to support your local church or even other types of donor advice funds, there are ways that people can give to your church long beyond their lifespan that can be a real blessing to your church. These are programs that we can dig into the details of later if you're really interested in that. But just remember, there's so many more ways to give into your church than just the traditional taking up an offering, or just the traditional of posting something and trying to get people to give to a specific project. 6 to 8 different ways is how to do it. I want to talk to and finally on the 4 ways to increase giving in your church. We did some studies with some accountants who do a lot of work with churches, and we compared that to what we see on the financial statements of the church loan fund. And what we discovered is that there are about 4 concepts that if we see this in churches, we typically see churches that have sustained giving in their church. And the first one is, and it's going to sound counterintuitive, but don't over ask. I attended a church service a couple years ago that really stood out to me. There were 5 different offerings taken up in that church service. They had special projects, they had a Mother's Day offering, they had a regular offering, tithe. It was crazy how many offerings were taken up in that one church service. Don't do that. Don't do that to people. Set up systematic giving and educate them on what it goes for, and just have one strong ask. There's ways to use graphics and multimedia to educate people on the different projects that maybe today's offering is going to go for. Making sure that people don't feel overwhelmed by this continual ask for money. You want to make sure that they are educated about it, but they're not overwhelmed with it. Following up on that also is you make it easy for people. Again, it goes back to offering 6 to 8 ways for people to give. When you make it easy and you make it consistent, they're more likely to do it. The third thing is to be a giving church. We talk a lot about money coming into the church, but I want you to think long and hard about how are we going to be a giving church? How are we going to make sure that 10% of the income in our local church is going to support other churches, other programs, other projects? Think about how your local missions. If you've got money coming into the church, setting aside maybe 10% of your annual budget just to go to local efforts in your community, because that's where you're there to minister to those people too, and how you can make connections in your community, and how you can be a real blessing to local folks in your community. I love it when I get financial statements on a loan application and I'll see how there's a special allocation to the foster children's care program of a county. I'll see those special allocations where it's Tupelo Children's Mansion, which that's great. It is outside of your community, but it's a way to bless those who are less fortunate than you. Whatever you're doing, making sure that you are being very strategic about how you're blessing your community and those outside your community as you manage your money. The last thing is making sure that people understand there's consistency and you're building trust. How you communicate back to your people is essential to them giving back into the church. Again, it goes back to what I started with, and that's those financial reports. showing people there's accountability, showing people that there's accuracy. You know, maybe you take your books and you give them to a CPA to have them audited every year. Whatever it is, you want to make sure that there's complete transparency and complete honesty in everything that you're doing. And when you build trust with people, you're going to see it return back with them demonstrating their trust through giving. I've had people tell me that, you know, I'm just not a money guy. I'm not a numbers guy. And so because of that, they use that as an excuse to not have good systems. My point is that ought to be the reason you have good systems. You know, if you're there to plant a church, you have a passion for people, it's highly likely that you're not a numbers guy. You know, most folks they're out there mission driven, they really don't like a lot of the details when it comes to managing money and managing church administration. But I would encourage you, create systems that help you manage your church, systems that create efficiencies. Think about efficiency. It makes it easier. It smooths out the processes. It takes the stress off you. Systems are great stress reducers. They don't have to be a source of stress. They can be a stress reducer. And remember again, they always build trust. Trust with the people that you're ministering to, trust with your donors, trust also with lenders, trust with wherever you're getting money from. You want to be sure that all that is built into your financial systems and structures to make sure that your church is structured for great growth throughout its longevity.